the much higher order of what shoes and the male can do, which is deliver happiness. He built his whole life around that. And when he passed away, that was so easily and clearly what people were able to recall about him. Richard Branson, I looked it up because I was curious, has the highest number of LinkedIn followers for a personal LinkedIn account, which I found really interesting because that's not what I would have expected. And then, of course, Brene Brown, you can't talk about vulnerability and self-awareness in the workplace without talking about her. And you might not even know much about where she comes from or her technical skills and knowledge, which is where a lot of people focus on a personal brand. But you know what she has made herself about. The signals that she has sent has made us understand who she is and what she stands for. I guess that what I would say about all those people is that they're really good storytellers. You can't talk about personal branding without talking about the way that we use stories to communicate that brand. I like this quote about how stories are the currency of human contact because I actually read a statistic. There's a whole body of research on this, that when you listen to a story, it could be a scary story, it could be one you don't even like, but the act of listening to a story releases oxytocin and can make you happier. And so when you think about the divisive world that we're in, or when you think about the noise out there, you want to break through, or connecting with one person or several, this is one of your best devices to actually help people open up and listen to what you have to say. Stories are so unbelievable powerful. So I have two more examples of storytellers that I've come to really admire in my personal branding work. Erica Joy Baker is out in California, and she's been very active in talking about diversity and inclusion in the tech industry. But I was totally struck when I went to her LinkedIn page, and I don't know how many of you spend as much time as I do looking at the About section on LinkedIn pages. But this is hers, it's a story, and it's really short. I like to slay big problems and puzzles. My weapons of choice are logic, data, curiosity, and code. And there's probably a ton of work that went into her figuring out how to make that so short and simple, but it helps you begin to imagine what she might be excited about and get a little flavor for what it would be like to work with her. This one I just had to add in as I was thinking about this presentation because I heard Gitanjali Rao on NPR the other day, and now I want to spend a lot of time telling my girls about her. But she talked about how, so eloquently, about how she's all about science for kindness. And that's such an intuitive concept that you don't, even if you don't know what kind of science she's doing or how she's achieving kindness, listening to her talk so eloquently about how her goal is to innovate for the better, to make positive change in this world, I came away feeling like I am ready to hand the keys to our universe over to this 15-year-old and say, okay, figure it out. Can you solve coronavirus? Which, by the way, she said she's going to be looking at. So to end this section, my point would be, allow yourself to have a mind shift, especially if you're one of those people who hears the term personal brand, feels allergic to it, doesn't think that it's something you can do. It's not about self-promotion. If you're thinking about it that way, it will feel that way. This is about human connection. This is about what do you have in your heart, in your past, in your career, and in your vision for the future that could allow other people to connect with you so that you can do it together or so that they can help you along the way. So we'll get into the building blocks of a brand. This actually looks very similar to the toolkit that I would develop if I was building a corporate brand. And that's kind of the point. One of the biggest differences I would make is if you're building a corporate brand, you tend to look as part of this at the landscape and say, what do we have that sets us apart? Where's the white space? You're really looking externally. When it comes to personal brands, the point is your personal brand is unique because it's yours. So our job is actually perhaps to look a little bit more internally so that we can put these different pieces together, and you're going to be unique. Your story deserves to be told simply because it is your story. You don't have to spend so much time, in my experience, looking at other people around you if you can get a real accurate sense of what you stand for, what you want to say. So this should be grounded in the objectives. That's really important. What do I want to achieve? For some people, a personal brand helps them perhaps bridge the gap between how they're currently seen and how they'd like to be seen. That's something I spend a lot of time talking to people about. Sometimes a personal brand helps you build a business, which is how I've used it. And sometimes it can help you connect with other people and make it to that next level to be considered for a promotion. So setting it with that objective at top, I think is really important, just psychologically, to remember why you're doing this in the first place. And then I'm going to go through these three on the side. Of course, because I'm in marketing, I have to make it alliterative. So purpose, persona, and proposition. are going to be the three most important pieces, and we'll talk through that briefly. And then, of course, everything needs to be translated through your audience who you want to reach. You probably know a lot about them. The idea is to spend a little time structuring that information so that it becomes actionable. And on the right-hand side, the output of this would be what some people think of as an elevator speech. I actually don't like that phrase, but I understand the importance of it. I like to think of it as a red thread. It's almost like the thesis that connects where you come from personally to where you've been, your experiences professionally, all the way through to what it is you're trying to achieve today and where you're headed. Your proof points, much like any corporate brand has, instead of being products or things that you sell, your proof points are going to be the way this comes to life through those stories, anecdotes, actions, and behaviors. So just digging into purpose in terms of the idea, I already mentioned Arianna Huffington. I love this point that she made in one of her presentations that I saw around the time that her book on sleep came out. Just the point that our eulogies are going to be made up of how we made people feel. Again, it's the emotion, right? What we added to others people's lives and what made us laugh. She also goes on to say that at your funeral, no one's going to come in and say, Kat was an amazing person. She never messed up sending out a Zoom call. You know, she never had background noise when I was talking to her, and her kids never interrupted her on a call, which is not at all the case. And so we're spending a lot of time in our careers perhaps looking in the wrong direction. And the whole point of putting purpose at the very top of this framework is to make sure you're starting off with what matters the most to you, because your career and everything you do is going to directly support the way you deliver on your purpose and how you want to be known in your life and also when you're gone. So just a couple of specific examples, because I find this is a really hard concept for people to unpack. It's incredibly overwhelming if you've never tried this, to sit down and say, what is my purpose? But a few of the questions, for some people, it's about what gets you out of bed in the morning. For some people, what's meaningful to you? Meaning is a really powerful word. And what is meaningful for you? How do you want to be known? What drives you? So if we had more time, typically what I would do is encourage you to take a moment and start answering some questions. I just had to pull out one, but there's actually books about this topic for people who really want to spend more time digging into different ways to think about purpose. What I have found is it's not a linear path from the point of saying, I want to define my purpose, to actually figuring it out. And there's a lot of exercises out there that can help essentially jar loose or open up your thinking to help you get a little bit closer. And the truth is, you're probably never going to be totally satisfied with it, but it becomes really evident to other people when you're spending time grappling with the big questions. So this is a big question. And Phoebe, I don't know, do we send out these slides? We could probably make these.
Yeah, we definitely can.
Want to have them. Yeah. Since I'm not going to give you time for them today. But persona is definitely my favorite, because if you just think about those brands I started with, the individuals and the companies, a brand that doesn't have a personality is pretty much impossible to connect with. I've worked with people who have so much knowledge to offer to the world in certain areas, but they're really reticent to bring some of who they are forward. And if we think about what we know about what makes brands powerful and helps them cut through or be effective, it's those brands that feel knowable. And if you don't allow some of your personality to come through and understand how and why you're bringing it in, it makes it really hard for people to want to know how to want to engage with you or to know what to do with any kind of information you're putting out there. A couple of places that you can go with this topic would be to ask yourself, how am I known? And this is a really great one to ask yourself, and then also test with other people in your life. If you have a personal board, that's usually one of the things I recommend. Find 4 to 6 people that you tend to consult most often for big choices and decisions in life. People maybe that you've consulted a lot. For a lot of us, the list is pretty short, but I encourage you to think about people you've worked with throughout your career in different roles. Answer some of these questions for yourself, and then spend the time that it takes reaching out and assembling a formal board and say, would you be part of my personal board? Could we talk once a quarter? Can I bounce these ideas off of you? People pretty much never say no. And I guarantee you, if you're anything like me, it's easy to fall in the trap of having a transactional network that you only use when you need them. And a personal board should be the people that you turn to on a regular basis, because they bring new energy, new ideas, and they help you build confidence. Those are the people to turn to, because if you do this just yourself, it's human nature. You're not going to get quite an accurate perception of what your persona is. There's some great questions you can ask about what it feels like to work with you. Some of my favorite line of questioning is to ask somebody, think about your perfect day at work. not a specific day, but give me an example. Describe your very best day. What's happening? Where are you? What are you doing? And why does it feel so good? And what would it look like for you to do more of that? But even more importantly, perhaps, when you're in that space in your zone, how do you think other people feel? And then from there, how might you articulate what your superpower is? This is one of my favorite questions if I'm interviewing people or just getting to know somebody. And it's really the answer to the question of what do you do better than anyone else? The picture I have here is of my older daughter when she was 3. We were on vacation, and the worst thing she could imagine happened to her, she got a splinter. I don't even know who told her about splinters, but at 3 years old, it was her biggest fear. She would have nightmares about splinters. We went on vacation. She got one. She screamed and cried. We took it out of her finger finally, and she said that didn't really hurt that bad. But she was pretty convinced she got a superpower injected where the splinter was. And this is her practicing her superpower, which was super speed. She called it Zoom Zoom. And anyone who knows Amelia, she's actually not a very fast kid. But I love the picture because it always reminds me of what it's like to be that young and believe in yourself. And if you spend time thinking about superpowers, we actually talk about it a lot in my household, because there are things that you do that people seek you out for. And oftentimes it's different from what you might tell people. It's different from what you know. So again, if we had more time, I'd encourage you, or even if you do have a moment, to take out a pen and write down an answer to this. What do you think your superpower is? And then I want to share with you, I ran a workshop recently with a couple hundred people from a really large company. And I ran a survey in advance and asked them the answer to this question. And this is, I really like this word cloud because it's really exemplary of the kinds of things people tend to say off the top of their head. Again, like my opening quote about feeling like vomiting, a lot of people feel really uncomfortable when you ask them to answer this question. And then when you push them, they'll come out with words like this: communication, connection, empathy, adaptability, teamwork, etc. And there's good words here, but I don't think they're very powerful. So I pulled out a few of the specific examples from that answer, from that survey. And a few of these are from that, some are from some more recent workshops I've done, but these are just some examples of superpower answers that I can't get out of my head. It's one thing to say, I'm always on time, but this one person said to me, I'm absurdly prompt. And at every single call I've been on with her, she's on exactly at the right moment. And it's such a funny thing to say because it's a way more interesting way to say something that is obvious or that someone else could say, but she says it in her own way. Knowing the time of day without a watch, I love that one. This person who told me that they can see 15 minutes into the future took a lot of explanation for me to understand what that meant. I'll spare you. But the point is, you want to capture imagination. A lot of people tell me they don't think that they have the ability to do that. But the truth is, if you ask the people who spend the most time with you in your life, you will be amazed at the things that you'll hear. So after you spend some time answering that question, I encourage you to think bigger, challenge yourself, ask some people, ask your spouse or your friends over dinner tonight, ask your kids, and see what a take 2 looks like and keep pushing yourself. One thing I will share is I spent a really long time thinking that my most potent superpower was related to my ability to activate. For anyone who's ever done Strength Finders test, I'm obsessed with it. I really subscribed to it. I got my whole company to do it before I left my last job. And I would start every call asking people what their top or last strength was. And I was amazed to learn that my top strength was an activator. And then my second strength was strategic, and I ran our strategy group. So I thought, how interesting that I'm surrounded by other people whose top strength is strategy. My top strength is activation. I have a bias towards action. I can take the ideas, but I also know how to put them into action, what to do with them, to build a structure around them. So I was filling this out for myself earlier this year, and I was trying to figure out what to do with this idea of activation. And I talked to a former coworker of mine, and he said, you know what I miss since you left is every time I got a new assignment, a new client or a project, and I wasn't excited about it, I could call you, and you could always make me excited about something. You could find the spark, you could find what's interesting and get me on board. And there was something was so powerful in that statement that it helped me realize that while I thought activation was what people might seek me out for uniquely, I started to realize that this enthusiasm I can have for pretty much any idea, I can find anything interesting. And I've always known that, but I never knew that other people saw such value in it. And that when you add it to things that I know, to what drives me, it actually paints a very unique and different picture than where I thought that I might go. So then lastly, on the value proposition piece, this is where a lot of people tend to have a lot of insight, but again, it's a great place to be really intentional and ask yourself, not only what value do I bring, what do I know, but how does my unique perspective and background really add to that? There's a whole series of tools that you may or may not be familiar with, a Lifeline exercise, which I'll talk about at the end of this presentation. And there's a career path narration exercise you can do, just taking an assessment of your skills, taking a look at your online presence, your LinkedIn posts. Sometimes those are things that can help you start to uncover if you're really unsure what your greatest value proposition is and how it's going to connect to the other two Ps. Coaching also, anyone's not had the chance to do coaching, I highly recommend it. So a sample question here would be simply, what knowledge or skill do I want to be known for? And sometimes it's about making a list and force ranking it. And there's tools you can use to send that out to other people and have them help you organize and reorganize and force rank those. So just to summarize, here's how it all comes back together. And because I find this can be helpful, here's mine. I should caveat this is always evolving. But when I first started to build this out, from an objectives perspective, I wanted to build thought leadership to attract new opportunities and grow my business. From a purpose perspective, as I challenged myself to think, I know what I'm good at, but what is going to be a meaningful way to use that in my lifetime? At the end of my life, whenever it is, if I look backwards, how could I use my skills to actually make the world a better place or to have a meaningful impact on others? And for me, I realized that when I'm at my best, I'm actually able to help other people be more curious, be more interested. And curiosity is something I really value. And along with that comes optimism. Another word that I've started to hinge on is confidence. I'm amazed at how much, and maybe constantly humbled at how much we all seek and need reinforcement, support, and confidence from others. And I've learned that I can use my strengths in coaching and consulting to help other people have that. And if I spent my whole life doing that in any form, that would be a life well lived for me. From a persona perspective, I already shared, thanks to my former colleague, I started to redirect a little bit and own the fact that I have unrivaled enthusiasm for really compelling ideas. That's really a big part of what it feels like to work with me and a part of what I enjoy about the work that I do. And then under my value proposition, I do brand strategy. But as I started to really tease apart the way to talk about my unique way of doing that, I can help unearth that spark in the heart of your brand, whether you're a person or a company. In terms of my audiences, leaders and companies who want to grow their impact in the world, I tend to get the most joy out of working with others who really want to have an impact and make the world a better place. So if I get to choose who I want to reach, that's who I want to target. Over time, I probably need to figure out how to narrow that and get more specific. And then here's how it starts to sound in a very short statement. I believe there is an inherent spark at the heart of every brand that has the power to make it truly captivating. For leaders and companies alike, I apply my unrivaled sense of curiosity and enthusiasm for ideas to help them unearth that spark so they can amplify their voices and make their mark on the world. And all these examples start to become proof points under that. And this list is always growing, but it started to help me see how everything fit together. And my company is Captivating Consulting. So it really helped me start to lean towards what do I want to own and what are those signals I want to send and how can I get more concise and precise about what I'm sending out to the universe. So we're actually doing pretty well in time. So just a couple thoughts on getting started. I've already made this point, but I want to say it again in case anyone needs to hear it today. Your story is unique because it's your story. Don't spend too much time, if you're going to wade into this topic, worrying about what other people are saying, because authenticity rules the day today. So just look within, check with people to gut check your assumptions about yourself, but you're not a company, right? If you're an entrepreneur, your brand converges with a company brand. But for your personal brand, you need to tell your story because you're a human being who has a story to tell. So the steps are pretty simple. To get started, just start writing. I can't tell you how hard this number one can be for a lot of people, which is why I like to send out the exercises and worksheets that I find useful, because sometimes sitting down in the morning with a cup of coffee, putting on some classical music and just putting pen to paper physically can help unlock the process and make it feel a little bit less overwhelming. Make sure you get input. Assemble your personal board. I have some tips and tricks and articles on that if anybody would like. And then get started. No matter where you are in your career, there's nothing that should be holding you back from spending time defining this, because the sooner you get going, the better you'll get at it. Once you accept that it's going to be kind of a process, it's not like you're going to put the right words on paper and be done. The more I think you'll find that it can be enjoyable and rewarding to keep going. Because this is VSET, and I get asked this question a lot, people are always wondering what's a structure. Yesterday, I just finished a 6-month masterclass where I got to run 20 people from 6 countries around the world through a long period of leadership development. And we spent about a third of that time on personal branding. And we actually gave them this structure after I worked with them on coaching and helped them find that red thread or thesis. And we watched everyone do this in 3 minutes. And they all put a lot of effort and practice into it. They were so nervous, but I was so proud of them. And I have to say, it was so amazing and powerful to hear somebody in 3 minutes be able to tell you a little bit about themselves, knowing where a lot of them started, which was bashful. I don't know how to answer that question. Tell me about yourself. I don't know. So just take the mystery out of it. Start off with that thesis. I like to think in 3 proof points. And I'll talk more about this on another slide, but anecdote and takeaway is your job to share an anecdote or a story, but very quickly to help people understand the point and the takeaway from that, what they should know or what you want them to hear in that story. And then a call to action, especially if you're driving a business. This is where these things come together. This is who I am. This is my background, how I got to here I am, where I am. Here's how you can help me, or here's what I'm hoping you would do. Sign up for my newsletter, have a virtual coffee with me, visit my website, read this blog post, any of those things. And then at the end, you can repeat again the summary with your thesis. So there's no way that you could take this and I imagine put it into action right away. But as I mentioned, I'm here, email me for worksheets and exercises. This is a passion project and topic for me. So I will never say no. And this, I'm going to file under the category of things I would love to do if we had more time. I do this exercise almost once a quarter. And it's based on an HBR article I read about 2 years ago from Nancy Duarte, who's one of the great minds in personal branding, in my perspective. And it's really simple. On the left-hand side, you're essentially going to sit down again with a pen and paper, not on your computer. Make a list of the people who've shaped your life and your career. It could be like a mind map with you in the middle. And as you draw each line out to your dad or your mom or your kids or your first boss, people you like, people you don't, challenge yourself to write a sentence describing how they've impacted you or how you describe and think about that relationship. Similarly with places, this is actually my favorite one. Think about places where you've spent time or that have made an impact on you. These could be mundane things. I recently did this exercise and I found myself thinking about computer labs. Does anybody remember computer labs? I'd be curious if they even are still around. And all of a sudden I remembered the first computer lab I ever spent time in. And then I remembered the computer lab at my university, because all sorts of drama happened there. I remember the computer lab I spent time in when I studied abroad in South Africa and how it smelled. And suddenly I was like, whatever happened to computer labs? But it just opened up all these creative thoughts that were completely disassociated from the stories I'm always trying to tell. And that's a really freeing feeling, because that's what it feels like to jar loose new anecdotes. And you might be amazed as you go through this process how a place you spent time in suddenly reminds you of something that happened there. And then lastly, things. So what's something with no material value, but that essentially in the same line of something you would grab if your house is on fire? Why does that thing hold significance? What does it say about you? And then on the right-hand side, starting to articulate the meaning of each of these are prompter questions. But I guarantee you, 15, 20, 30 minutes spent doing this exercise, you will come away feeling just that much closer to having some new inspiration and ideas. There's also an article that goes behind this if anybody wants to see that. This is just a visualization of the Lifeline exercise, because when I first did it, I drew it by hand and it was embarrassing to share that in public. So I just did it with a straight line. But for anyone who has never done this, the idea is that at the top would be, on your y-axis would be when you've been your happiest, the bottom would be when you're saddest, and the middle is kind of your lifeline from birth to now. And first thing to do is kind of go through and draw out how you've felt at different points throughout your life, right? Where were you happiest? Where were you saddest? You'll be thinking about different things that happen at different points in your life. And then you go back and you circle certain pieces and try to think about what it was that was happening. So you're first going to think about the facts, right? So maybe you took a gap year and it was a really wonderful experience for you. And then you need to start to fill in the meaning in the context of your personal brand or whatever story you're trying to tell. Because the point is to elevate from saying somebody something they could read on your resume to helping them understand fairly immediately, you're doing the hard work here, what it means about you as a professional. You switched industries early in your career. Usually I find if you go back and look at your resume, think about things that are not intuitive. Why is there a gap here? Why did you switch? Why is this in a different city? What happened? What does this award mean? Filling in the gaps is also a really great place to go and find some really rich storytelling, because sometimes those are the best examples of what drives you in action. So with that, I'm going to pause, but this is a quote that only got recently shared with me that I hadn't seen before. But if there's any last thing I can do to encourage you to get out there and start talking and practicing and be unafraid to feel awkward putting your voice out there, it's this. Because life is short. The world is waiting for your vision. You have something unique to say simply because you're you. So share it and then find ways to tie it back to where you're going. But I guarantee that if you do this stuff, if you start thinking about these topics and questions and journaling and asking yourself them every day, A, it will become way more evident to other people around you that you're doing the hard work. B, it will fine-tune those signals you're putting into the universe. And I guarantee you'll pretty quickly start to see some new opportunities and sponsors and people coming back your way that are bigger than you could have dreamed of. And C, you'll start to find more meaning in what you do every day. And if that's not something that's appealing, I don't know what else is. So I'll stop now. And if anybody has anything that I went through too quickly or any questions, please let me know. And I also mentioned I'm here. You can always email me. Obviously, I love talking about this topic.
Kat, that was awesome. I was furiously taking notes, and I think ending on a Deepak Chopra quote was really awesome, because similarly, I think as I've gotten older, you just realize how nothing really matters but what you want to do and what you're good at. And so like peeling back the layers of what are you doing for other people or what are you doing for society that's not really aligned with who you authentically are. And stripping that back, I think, is like the sooner you do it, the more happy you will be in your life. So thank you for such an awesome presentation. I have a bunch of questions that I would love to ask, but I want to open it up to some others first. Sam had a question that came in of, could you share an example of a thing that holds meaning to you?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have, sorry guys, I just saw the chat function. It was hidden. I didn't realize there were comments coming in. So yay, because there's nothing more reassuring than talking into silence. So I'm so excited there's chats here. I have about 12 journals. I started journaling when I was 5, which is funny. Now I have a 6-year-old and I can only imagine what I was writing. But it's one thing I've done. I'm not religious. It's one thing I've done religiously in my life. And now I write to my 2 daughters pretty religiously as well. I don't do scrapbooks very well, but I write to them. And so that would be the first thing that I would think I would go and grab, because I feel like I can, at any point in time, I can go grab one of those off the shelf and be with myself at different points in life. Some of them are pretty embarrassing to read, but I suppose, and I've never written this down, the meaning I would find in that in terms of my own personal brand is I'm a bit of a historian and I'm always looking for meaning, and so I can go back at any point in time and I can kind of be with myself and see what I found meaningful then. But what's even richer is what you see new every time you reread it. So that's something that's personal to me. No one's ever asked me that. Thank you.
I think that's definitely one of the most cringy exercises, but such a good like snapshot to see, you know, how far you've come too.
Yeah, when I was in middle school, I used, I wrote, oh gosh, in every entry. Oh gosh.
Cute.
I got switched to be lunch. Oh gosh.
Oh my gosh.
That's crazy.
I love that. Another question came in from Jayan. Do you have any strategies for avoiding coming off as inauthentic?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked that a lot, and I suppose the best strategy I could offer is this framework and spending some time answering these really tough questions. So to whoever asked that, I'd love to share the worksheets, because I think if you allow yourself to go back to where you come from and look for evidence. One person I coached, I talked to the other day, and she said, now that I have a handle on my brand and my kind of thesis, everything I do almost feels like another proof point of me being more like myself, you know. And once you start to see the patterns, they become present everywhere. So the authenticity hopefully will be reflected in knowing that you've done those exercises and starting to see that and being able to look back and see examples of when you've done it as well. And it's really hard to do yourself. And so that's where you have to lean on your personal board. As you start to draft this, you'll feel very naked, which is totally okay. But sharing drafts of this with people and saying, what do you think? What am I missing? Does this feel like me? That's your best safeguard. The people you trust to help make sure that you're being true to yourself.
Yeah. As similar to like a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Nadav had a question. I find myself resisting wanting to put myself into a box by defining what I can offer. Can you help me get past that?
Yes. That's a really interesting question. I appreciate it. So I find myself saying this to companies when they're working on their brands just as much as I do to people. But you have to sort of allow yourself, relinquish yourself from the belief that if you are very much about one thing, that you're not about anything else. Mm-hmm. The whole idea of being knowable is that if you more authentically put yourself out there about what you're interested in, what you're working on, or what you care about, people will see their own version of that in you. And so it doesn't mean you're holding yourself, blocking yourself off from anything. But Nadav, I'll hold up an example. I'm working with Nadav right now on a strategic planning project. And when I decided how I wanted to fashion my consulting business, I really grappled with, should I be about strategic planning and brand strategy? Because I felt like it was just a little too much. Or should I just lean into brand strategy because that feels really meaningful to me? And I also do strategic planning. And what I found is I get a lot of projects that aren't brand strategy, but that are totally in my wheelhouse. So if that's just one piece of evidence, I think being about something is really appealing to people, and it doesn't stop them from asking you or coming to you or offering up opportunities that might be a little bit out of that or a little different from that.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome advice. Yeah, you don't have to put yourself in a box. One question I had for you, well, I have a few, but when you started it off with, if you don't tell your story, people will tell it for you. That's super motivating. Like your story is going to get told, you might as well be the one to tell it. Is there a clear way to find out what assumptions people might have made about you or your brand?
Well, I mean, you could do like an audit of sorts on what kinds of things are coming your way. But that quote, well, two things. So first of all, that quote is mostly born out of just the discovery and realization once I started going through all the data that's emerging about the value of when people put time into defining their brand and actually building a voice for themselves, which really comes out of a lot of research on why women historically don't want to talk or don't think that they should be talking vocally. And men tend to be less afraid of that. There's actually been a lot of organizations that have done research into the women who are speaking more vocally and speaking up and know what they stand for are the ones attracting more sponsorships. And I have that data that I decided not to put in the presentation today. So the first would be just don't be silent, right? Because you're counting yourself out from the beginning. The second would be you could kind of look at what kinds of opportunities are coming your way. I can't tell you how many times I hear from people, I'm on LinkedIn, but I never get recruited. What am I doing wrong? And that's a piece of evidence, right? I would say people probably just aren't thinking of you because you're not talking, you're not telling your story. So that's one way to make sure you're not going to get what you want. And another way is there's a tool, and I'll have to find this link. I have not used it. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a quadrant tool where you can identify the values that you value in yourself, traits that you value in yourself. You can send it the same link to people and ask them to identify the traits they value most in you. And it'll plot them out and help you see where things are overlapped, or maybe where there's things that are totally different and you might be surprised. I love the stuff where you're totally surprised that other people see something in you or value something in you that you're completely overlooking.
Which I feel like happens all the time.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I love when you mentioned personal boards, like gathering some folks to kind of reflect to you. What does that look like for you specifically? And what's an example of something that's ongoing that you ask them beyond the initial feedback gathered from them about you?
Well, it's an interesting question to ask me right now, because a year ago, I was at a company I'd been at for 10 years. And what I realized once I kind of broke off and went out on my own, I always had it in my head that working for myself would be lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually been exactly the opposite. And I don't know what it would have been like if it wasn't 2020. But I spend so much time having virtual coffee chats and connecting with people. So I am talking to people all the time. But what that personal board exercise is grounded in for me was an experience I had at a professional training I went to, where we had to make a list of who are the people in your life you turn to most, A, to make a professional decision, B, to enhance your career, C, to make a big life decision personally, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost thought I failed the test because it was like the same three people for everything. And my husband, I was actually, he loved it. He was like, you ask me all the time for this stuff, but there's all these other people in my life that I value. I've spent my entire career building relationships. And what I started to realize is that when it came to networking and my network, if I didn't have an immediate pressing need, I wasn't talking to people. And that allows relationships to ebb, but it also means that you're missing a chance to bring fresh voices and inspiration into your life that will lift you up. Mm-hmm. So what I started to do after coming away from that is I thought about who I wanted to be on those lists that weren't there, that would bring more diversity, especially because I knew I was thinking about going out on my own. And I reached out to all of them with this very specific ask, explaining why I was building a personal board, why I wanted them on it, and asking them if they'd be willing to be part of it. And now I have one person that I talk to monthly, who I used to talk to almost never. And this is a person I don't know that well socially and have never worked with, but we professionally have a connection. And that person single-handedly has probably exponentially grown my entire network this year for me, because she brings so much different perspective to me. And I just so deeply value the fact that she has a very different understanding of who I am than people who know me almost too well. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of the questions, I mean, with some people, it's a WhatsApp, hey, what do you think about this language? With other people, it's, hey, would you look at this draft of my website? And I have to be really judicious about how I'm feeling that day and how much I can tolerate what different people might say. But yeah, it's been so gratifying. I feel like my life is so much more full.
Yeah, being like very open to feedback. You have to kind of catch yourself in the right mood, but then it's very rewarding if you can take it. So all of these prompts and exercises, I think there's so many people on this call that are interested in finding out more and doing more exercises as a way to kind of trick yourself into reflecting on what's important to you and how you're coming across. How often do you recommend checking back or updating your brand statement? And has yours changed at all since you started?
I mean, for me, it's continuous. And one thing I say about brands when I'm talking about corporate brands in particular is that brand is a verb. Mm-hmm. I have a slide that says that in really big font, and I took it out of this presentation. The point being that if you're sitting around looking for language, that's that silver bullet that's going to explain to people what your company stands for in a way that your actions apparently aren't doing justice to, then you're looking in the wrong direction, right? Your brand, all those brands we talked about today, are the sum total of actions you take every single day, the behaviors, the way that you put me, Patagonia having, all the stands that they choose to take as a brand and being corporate activists before anybody else was. That is really what their brand is, right? It's the equity we put into it. Same thing with a personal brand. There's kind of the intent. I like the framework because there's that, who is it, Mark Twain quote, I would have written a shorter letter if I'd had more time. I'm so guilty of that. I write these monstrously long emails because I don't take the time to edit them down. But the intention of having to sit down and put something in a tiny little box, it's not really even what you put in the box so much as the thought process you go through to make that shorter, to be more intentional. So I put it in there. Every time I pick it back up, I tweak it because I've had more life experience. But the whole essence of it continues to stay the same. So I would say I haven't come upon any specific recommended cadence, I suppose. But in my coaching, if I'm working with someone on a monthly basis, we'll usually take it back out as we talk through whatever it is you're grappling with at that moment. And we use it as a framework to help answer or guide them to answers for some of the things they're facing.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. 2 more questions came through. Elizabeth asked, I'd love to work on my unblocking my anecdotes. Can you recommend any writing prompts to help with this?
Yes, my hands down favorite one that I will recommend over and over and over again is the one that I referenced in this presentation from Nancy Duarte on people, places, and things. I've used that with CEOs. I've used that with companies. I've used it with all sorts of different people. And every time I have people do it, I do it myself. And I'm always amazed at what comes out of it. So as far as unlocking anecdotes, I prefer exercises that are non-linear because I tend to think linearly when I'm telling a story. I talk chronologically. But I also know people who really enjoy exercises that are chronological. Usually in coaching, the first thing I do is I interview someone and I ask them to tell me their whole life story and move into the career stuff when we get there. But what's amazing, it's amazing. I actually was talking to a woman the other day who literally grew up in northern Siberia. And in our first conversation about her brand, this didn't come up. She comes to our second meeting and she's like, I was thinking about this. I probably should have told you I actually grew up in Siberia, in northern Siberia. And I realized that growing up there made me realize that when you're in the coldest places on earth, you start to realize exactly how warm the human spirit can be. Like she just unprompted said that and I was completely blown away. Wow. But as humans, I believe we don't always know what our most interesting anecdotes are. So sometimes you have to go way back to the beginning and be unafraid to bring that forward into how it shaped you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, Sarah. I totally agree. How do you forget that?
I love that. And I guess it becomes just so inherent that it's not at the forefront.
I think that we live our lives. So we're really, I'm working with an executive right now who's from South America. And the last thing she wants to talk about is being from South America. And I think for a lot of people, so many of us feel like we've had to work really hard to overcome certain things of who we are that we don't necessarily want to talk about it. But it's not just about talking about it for no reason, right? If you can find a way to talk about how it's shaped you and how it's helped you become the professional you are, which is the work we have to do of putting the pieces together, that's where the red thread comes. So once you start to see these little pieces of evidence and start to see these same patterns, I made a decision because, where I kept going to jobs where I talked to someone recently who came to me saying, my career is so random. I've worked in all these different countries. I've done all these different jobs. But what I really want to do is environmental consulting. And I've never done it before. So how can I take all these disparate examples and make the case that I have something to offer over here? And as we went through it, I kept saying to her, you come from this place where your two parents are from different countries. You grew up this kind of like wanting to study diplomacy and your approach to life seems to be very diplomatic. And what you want to do, there's a role for that. So could we talk about that? Mm-hmm. And she just really did not want to talk about where she came from. Yeah. But once we started to show how that actually helped shape her worldview and add to the value she offers in terms of her value proposition, it completely unlocked. And she was in that class I mentioned, she was just at her 3-minute speech yesterday, and it was mind-blowing how succinct it sounded and how logical it was. It didn't feel weird at all, but she did a lot of work to put the pieces together.
Mm-hmm. A question came through of that I really like. How tied should your personal brand be to your company brand? As someone early in my career, I feel like my personal brand is almost completely defined by my company's.
Yeah, that's really hard. And I don't know if that person is an entrepreneur running their own company or working for a company. One of the reasons I got really interested in this topic is because when I left my old company, I realized that I'd been there for a decade and I'd grown them from when they were 1 to 11. And my network of people was all really tied to it. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I don't know what's mine. I don't know who I am separate from that company. And if I don't know, nobody else does either. And so I've come to be of the mind that we really need to spend time doing personal branding exercises so you can understand those connections better, even while you're at the company. And it's okay to understand that there's areas of overlap and connection between who you are and who your company is, but that they're not the one and the same.
Yeah, awesome.
Hi, Emily.
And then we'll leave off on a fun question from Sam. If you could help one person rebrand, who would it be?
I saw that. I have no idea. I feel like I really need to think about that. I'd be curious if you have any ideas, Sam, or anybody else, but it's a great question. So I'm really going to have to, I feel like there's got to be a wish list.
Yeah. Well, awesome. I think we're out of time, but this was so helpful, and we'll definitely send out the slides and the recording to everyone who joined. And just thank you for the Vermont SBDC for sponsoring this, and thank you, Kat, for your time and your generous knowledge.
This was awesome. It's so much fun. Thanks, everybody. I'd love to hear from you.
Have a good day.